Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome back. What a week, huh? A couple of weeks that we've had here. Just a program note for you all. We will be taking a little break after tonight's Welcoming Shabbat programming, and we will return on December 4th. Arthur and I are going to enjoy a little Thanksgiving staycation, but we'll be thinking of you. Some classes and so forth will be on, so consult the newsletter during that period, and you'll find out what's happening. Let's begin tonight with a reading about gratitude. On this Shabbat, we gather with a strong sense of gratitude. Hope is on the horizon. We celebrate the power of possibility for our nation and new leadership, for our physical health and the likelihood of a vaccine to return us to life as we knew it. And so we begin the Shabbat with expressions of awe and joy. A community of believers celebrating the wonders that life can offer. For the grandeur of the universe, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, we embrace gratitude. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and seasons, we re-embrace gratitude. For human community, our past and future hope, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility or oppression, in times of crisis or peace, we re-embrace gratitude. For the innumerable deeds of loving kindness which continue even as we are physically apart, we re-embrace gratitude. For the skill and dedication of caregivers, of nurses and doctors and technicians and researchers working around the clock to heal, we re-embrace gratitude. For all the joys that living brings, for resilience in the face of great difficulties, for the caring hearts of loved ones and friends, we embrace gratitude as we welcome Shabbat with Lecha Dodi.
לך דודי, לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי, לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach.
I'd like to invite Arthur to now light candles for us as we sing the blessings and formally welcome Shabbat. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, Baruch ha'or ba'adam, Baruch ha'or ba'shalom, ba'shalom, Baruch ha'or, Baruch ha'or b'Shabbat. Join me in raising a glass of l'chaim to life, everybody. Tonight, we welcome Shabbat, looking to this moment in time to once again gain perspective on where we have been and where we are going. On this Shabbat, may we find the space to consider and to challenge. May we find the courage to do what is right. Together, let us find meaning, calm our anxieties, understand our purpose, and appreciate our accomplishments. Let us find the strength to continue working for ourselves and others. Let us share the burdens and blessings of responsibility. Let us locate the will to change the things we can no longer accept. Let us do all this and more, mindful that we are a community of humanistic Jewish believers, unbroken, unbowed, prepared to face all that life has in store for us. Let us strive to feel those bonds of belief and community, even as we are separated. Let us rejoice in our ties. Let us rejoice in our collective power. Let us rejoice in the gift of Shabbat. As humanistic Jews, we look to our people's entire experience to remind us of the power of community. In that spirit, we continue to welcome Shabbat with this special song and video, Ma Tovu, celebrating the beauty and challenges of Jewish history, providing us with greater perspective to evaluate and to be grateful for our time on this earth.
מה טובו אוהליך יעקב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל. מה טובו אוהליך יעקב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, לכו ונלכה, כי מקור הברכה, מקור הברכה. מה טובו אוהליך יעקב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל. מה טובו אוהליך יעקב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל.
Let us strive to lead loving, compassionate lives with our hearts, with our wisdom, and with our actions. These are the ideas that we inscribe upon our innermost hearts, that we may practice them day and night, teaching them diligently to our children through our words and especially through our deeds, so that the next generations learn to revere and celebrate life. Efo Ori. Four years ago, on just about this same date, I stood before a packed meeting room at our congregation to deliver a post-election address that I called, with trademark snark, "What the hell just happened here?" I talked about the polling in 2016, that dreaded polling that showed a likely victory for Hillary Clinton. That same polling that was also not so great this year, but for different reasons that we need not lament on this Shabbat. I also talked about some of the newer challenges, at least newer back then, that I believed then and now contributed to the outcome, particularly social media. That challenge has remained with us, as over the past several years, we've learned just how pernicious it was and continues to be, and how it's getting worse. as a spreader of vicious, frequently anti-Semitic conspiracy theories like QAnon. Mostly what I talked about was what to expect from at least 2, it didn't turn out to be 4, years of wall-to-wall single-party GOP rule. When I spoke that night, it was to prepare people for challenges that I believed lay ahead, to steel us for the enormous labor we would need to undertake in order to preserve our deeply held values and commitments. My goal tonight is not completely different, even if it is offered in a different spirit. My goal tonight is to look at what we've been through and remind ourselves that there is much work that lies ahead. So to do that, I want to take us back 4 years to that night when I made that attempt to warn us of what was coming and to encourage us to be very clear about our values as humanistic Jews and what we would need to do in order to put them into action. So I called this little talk tonight, How'd He Do? And that was about my predictions, but it could have also been appropriate to talk about to name the talk, How Do We Do? When we were called upon to stand up for our beliefs. So one of my biggest misjudgments or errors came in underestimating the Republican Party's ability to remain united in the face of the dismantling of what many conservatives, real conservatives, have said were their very deeply held principles. 4 years ago, I believed that the loss of the common enemy, namely President Obama, who had served as the target of the populist, and I think we should now feel unconstrained to call them racist attacks, what else is birtherism, that would mean that the winners would now be forced to reckon with their own internal disagreements. But frankly, that didn't really happen. Free trade Republicans, that used to be a centerpiece of conservatism, did not rise in fury over protectionist tariffs. Deficit hawks did not shriek about the big new holes in the budgets. The Trump administration's embrace of strongmen and autocrats, even as he was belittling and disparaging our historical allies, well, that raised barely a peep among GOP leaders and legislators. In fact, usually we either heard nothing or what peeps we did hear were from senators and representatives spouting conspiratorial nonsense directed at those who were investigating the Russian scandal or over the Ukrainian scandal that, of course, resulted in impeachment. I remember thinking back then that, well, at least with Senator McCain and Senator Graham there, Trump will be held to a level of responsibility, even perhaps statesmanship, and we all know what happened there, especially once Senator McCain had left us. I was really wrong about that. Trusting that Republicans would challenge Trump on anything was a huge miss on my part. So where was I right? Well, that night I said, and this is almost verbatim from my talk, that the new president was woefully unprepared for the job, that he is a thin-skinned narcissist, lashing out at anyone who dared criticize him, anyone who failed to praise his greatness. But I have to be honest with you, I really did think that more people were going to catch on, that more people who voted for him would experience buyer's remorse, that as I said that night, perhaps having been conned by one of the greatest con men of our times, those who are his marks will awaken to the reality that they were taken. That did not happen. I continue to be a bit surprised by it. Traditionally, at least in the movies anyway, when a con man gets you, you eventually know you've been got. This pandemic, for example, a virus highly resistant to caring about whether one believes in it or not, highly resistant to political spin, is still nevertheless regarded by his followers as either a hoax or an unserious threat. That an easily disproven con like this could continue to endanger our public health does continue to amaze me and frighten me. Perhaps someday historians will figure this out. Because while social media certainly plays its part, this is really the work of the non-leader in chief. Now, there were, of course, Republicans who got the message, some from the very beginning. That's why we saw such well-funded efforts in this election, like the Lincoln Project, led by those renowned liberals. No, I'm kidding, of course, those profoundly important American conservatives, Bill Kristol and David Frum and others, and Republican voters against Trump, demonstrating that this has never been about ideology, but about something else altogether. Perhaps we need a new name for whatever this syndrome is, something like Stockholm Syndrome, that has managed to capture some 70 million plus voters. I said 4 years ago, watch out, because Trump is Trump. He is impetuous, I said. He lacks impulse control. He lashes out. He's childish. A president does not tweet, as he was doing at the time and continued to do, that protesters are unfair. Which, by the way, should also remind us that he never had any conception of what the Constitution is, perhaps never read it. I warned that Trump is Trump, and that means a prescription for unprecedented ethics violations. That happened. He did not put his companies in a blind trust, as I said he would not. He turned them over to his children, as we knew that he would. And he got them the highest level security clearance, even as it turned out, and surprisingly somewhat, when our national security experts and officials said that they did not and should not have them. I asked then, what could possibly go wrong with all of this? And we all learned the hard way that there was so much more that would. Another area in which I and so many others were wrong were over his appointments. I say we were wrong because it all turned out so much worse than we had anticipated. The White House was a virtual revolving door of officials and appointees. People, some of whom we were so worried about, didn't even wind up spending that much time there. A few wound up under indictment. So where 4 years ago we were talking nonstop about Michael Flynn and Steve Bannon, little would we know what would become of them. We're still not exactly sure, but at least one is on trial and the other has been sentenced. There were other worrisome people that we did not yet know we should be worried about. People like Stephen Miller and his outrageously racist immigration policy. Like Betsy DeVos, an ignoramus with a complete lack of background in public education, determined to privatize public education, to elevate religiously backed education programs to unprecedented heights. People like Mike Pompeo, who was not yet our Secretary of State nor being spoken about as such, who would go on to fire a respected U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and to alienate large numbers of State Department professionals, so much so that its professional corps has been thinned to almost unthinkable levels. People like EPA Chief Scott Pruitt. We were worried about his policies, but little did we imagine that he could be so profoundly ethically challenged. Replaced, of course, by Andrew Wheeler, a coal lobbyist. And then there was Wilbur Ross, he's still there, who was Commerce Secretary, among other things, and I'll quote now from one of my favorite columnists, the New York Times, Gail Collins, issued threats to fire officials at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, because they reassured Alabamians that a hurricane was not headed their way, no matter what crazy maps a certain chief executive drew with his Sharpie. I could take up the rest of your Shabbat with these things, but I'll end with the reminder that there are currently at least 15 high-level appointees who have not even been submitted for confirmation. And that it was just a few months ago when a federal judge ruled that the administration was violating Article 2 of the Constitution, requiring Senate confirmation, famously known as advice and consent. So now as I head into the home stretch, here's some specific issues that we also knew we would face. Issues that speak directly to our deeply held beliefs and commitments as humanistic Jews. Issues that we must continue to address no matter who sits in the White House or in Congress. One of these, top on our agenda as a congregation, immigration. The courts saved DACA, but there was so much more that we did not even anticipate, beginning with the travel ban that took so many of our members to the airport for our first congregationally sponsored widespread participation in widespread protests. Immigration policy reached its nadir with family separations and children in cages, something that we have been outraged at as a community, out in front in support of immigrants, joining progressive Jewish organizations and humanistic organizations throughout our country. We must not let up this pressure. Another issue that worried us all was LGBTQ plus rights. I personally was not worried about same-sex marriage getting tossed, though now with the new composition of the court and some of the things that they've said and written, I am a little bit more worried now. But trans rights in particular, already threadbare in most locales, were trampled upon with a special glee by many states and by Trump's move to ban transgender individuals from serving in our military, which he announced on Twitter. When it comes to reproductive freedom, from abortion rights to access to birth control, most of that damage, of course, continues to take place at the state level, but not all. And the Trump administration's contribution to the diminution of such rights may not be apparent fully until new cases reach the new Supreme Court, loaded now with 3 Trump-appointed justices. And perhaps it may be said in several years from now, the greatest area of damage done by this administration, also forecast by me and many others, will prove to have been the environment. Just last week, the New York Times reported that there have been 104 environmental protection rollbacks on vital rules and regulations. All told, the paper wrote, the Trump administration's rollbacks could significantly increase greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade and lead to thousands of extra deaths from poor air quality each year, according to the energy and legal analysts that they consulted. And let's not forget that the war on climate change and science, really in general, began in this administration with the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. In all, I and many others were right more than we were wrong. And where we were wrong, it was because things were far worse than we ever could have imagined. I concluded my address 4 years ago with these words. This is not a drill, I said. We must dedicate ourselves and rededicate ourselves to protecting the most vulnerable. For some of this, whatever happens may not be a personal hit, like it will be for others. But for all of us, we are required to fight the bigotry, the cheap populism, the divisiveness, and the demagoguery that is taking over the White House. It is, I said, at times like this that we demonstrate who we really are, that we put ourselves on the line in defense of the weak and the needy and the oppressed. We must, I said, speak up, even if that makes us unpopular with some. We must, as a congregation, consider what we should do to protect the weakest and most endangered elements of our society. We are not, I said, tested during the best of times. We are tested during the darkest days. Well, I am here now 4 years later to say that I am and have never been more proud of being a humanistic Jew and serving our community. We rose up in every way that we were called upon. We made a difference. The lists of protests, of petitions, of all kinds of activism in which we engaged is very long. Tonight, we are cautiously celebrating a return to civility and decency and an end to the harsh divisiveness that has characterized the current administration. But the fight for a better nation is only just beginning. So let's keep our sleeves rolled up. We may feel that we are much closer, but we are by no means there yet. Oh yes, one more thing. Let's all wear our damn masks. Once again, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We continue with this song.
אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, מתי, אם אין אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, מתי. בכל דור ודור היה ואדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. אם אין אני לי מי לי, ושאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, מתי.
When we greet each other on Shabbat, we think of shalom, of peace. It's right there. We say Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat has always been a symbol of peace. Our ancestors called it a taste of the world to come. The peace that they sought to create on Shabbat teased them with hopes that such calm might one day prevail throughout the world. Perhaps that was just a fantasy, but it gave them comfort nonetheless. Today we understand that if we desire such a world, it must come through our own work. Perhaps Shabbat can now remind us of that. We continue with Na'aseh Shalom. In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wrong. Tonight, our well wishes are extended to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Cece Stone, Julie Eliason, Karen Tremper Harris, Myron Tink, Robert Liebhaber, Peter Schweitzer, Isabel Jeffrey, Deborah Drennan, and Eliza Mann. May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly. May they experience the complete recovery, refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits.
The
Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Our congregation continues to mourn the recent deaths of Bernice Bunny Lasker and of Stuart Rice. As we observe tonight these yard sites, a rather long list since we will be off for 2 weeks, these precious individuals: Helen Hussad, Pearl Broida, Sanford Heyman, Ilse Weinberg, Julian Ziegler, Lou Freeman, Pearl Broida, Julian Unger, Philip Gard, Benjamin Miller, Michael Buchzeiger, Thomas Jacoby, Carol Klarich, Rita Liebhaber, Ruth Schwartzwald, John Kurland, Jeanette Ross, Ida Smokler, Gerald Gotthelf, David Tepley, Leo Mann, Tilly Miller, Isaac Rinsky, Greta Haas, Joseph Festovsky, Ruth Kahn, Edna Morris, Clara Stawicki, Samuel Finkelstein, Joseph Ernst, and Peter Friedman. May memories of these beloved individuals bring a sense of comfort to those who now must live in their absence. Well, that's our service for tonight. Our program for welcoming Shabbat will return on December 4th, and we'll end with this wonderful song, a brand new recording and video. It's called Hine Matov, but it's a very different version, one that we frequently conclude with at the temple when we're in person, which hopefully we soon will be with the good news this week. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. Behold how good it is when people dwell together, living as one people, hand in hand. What keeps us safe and strong is that we have each other, one human family across the land. Hine ma tov ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.